Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to Saturday Sesh. We're glad to have you all back. This is something we do on the first and third Saturday of every month. We are education focused, and this is kind of like a benefit we feel like to being part of our Canna family. And we've got a big Canna family, but not everybody has an opportunity to just hang out and chill with their crew. And so this is a good opportunity to bring our folks together, whether you're studying with us through Seattle Central College or through UNLV or otherwise friends and affiliated with us. It's a good opportunity to come together and learn from industry professionals. And today we have one for sure. We're really happy to welcome Brian Box Brown, author of Cannabis, the Illegalization of Weed in America. And Brian, how you doing? Welcome.
Hey, good, great. Well, pretty good anyway. Had like a plumbing emergency this morning to deal with, which was not fun, but having fun now.
Yeah, glad you came through, and I know you've been through the ringer the last couple of days. I gotta say, my husband bought this book just a few months ago, and I used to work at Savannah College of Art and Design, so I'm a fan of graphic novels also. And this is beautiful. I know you've also written a book on Andre the Giant, a book on Andy Kaufman, a book on Tetris and the way people play games and the history of gameplay. And so some big subjects, and this no doubt is a heavy subject that you turn around and just it's beautiful. And so we're really happy to have you today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I want to start with a few questions. This is different than a book on Andy Kaufman or on Tetris, and you know, it's important, and we're so glad that you focused on the law and how that how that came to be. What's your feedback been like?
I think it's been positive. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So I think it's been good. All of my books are about things that had like a strong influence on me at a young age. So Tetris, Andre the Giant, Andy Kaufman, and Cannabis too. So like, I was arrested for cannabis like when I was a teenager, and I think I always wonder like if I would have been as much of an enthusiast if I didn't get arrested when I was 16, because it made it, first of all, I think it turned me on to cannabis more because it made it seem like forbidden, right? But also like I just could never, since then, like, I was never able to get it out of my head that like, why is this illegal? Like I couldn't understand it. And so, and no one could explain it either. I would like ask my parents about it, and they were users also, but like it was kind of covert at the time. But they couldn't like explain it to me either. They're just like, I don't know, that's just the way it is. Like there's nothing, we can do it. I would be like, well, why? How come you can just like go buy a bottle of whiskey and like drink enough of it to kill you or kill somebody else driving? Like all these things, but like you can't smoke like this joint. Like I had to go, because I was like arrested. I had probation, a probation situation, and like the other thing was that I noticed that I didn't notice it at the time. I was just happy to get the F out of there, you know what I mean? But when I was looking back on it as an adult, realized that they treated me better than a lot of the other kids that were in probation, because we were like all sitting there together, and you had to like go take a piss test every time. I was allowed to like go by myself, no problem. Like just go do my own piss test, come back. If you were black, brown, whatever, if you weren't white, that was like not allowed. You had to have like the probation officer went with you. Like, so it was, I was witness to stuff like that. I got off probation in 4 months instead of 6. For what reason? I don't know. Like, I didn't do anything different than any of the other people that were there. So it had like a profound effect on me. And after I did the Andre the Giant book, my publisher was like, well, what other subjects are you interested in? And I gave them like this whole long list of stuff, and cannabis was on there. But at the time, like, they weren't ready to publish a comic about cannabis, like, whatever. And so I did like this other book. I did the Tetris book. I did the Andy Kaufman book. And then later, like, the tides had changed, I feel like, in culture. And like, they were ready to publish a cannabis book. And then, so then they came back to me and they were like, how about you do this cannabis book? And I was like, hell yes. And so, I kind of was trying to channel that like 16-year-old kid that got arrested and like make a book for that. Not necessarily a 16-year-old kid, but for adults and stuff, but to explain why it's complete bullshit, like, in using the medium that I know how to do now of comics, you know.
Well, and we do require people to be 21 to take our class, but I do think if you're 16, it's still a beautiful book. A lot of people,
Yeah.
you know, I know maybe you can't advertise that way, but it's so great that people get another look at this, because although we start with history in our class, a lot of people aren't aware of the impact, and it's, you know, it's just truly a crime that people are sitting in jail while other people are making money for doing the same damn thing. I want to show people just a little bit, just if I could, some captures of the book so they could have some idea of what we're talking about. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, I can.
So you start, it's really interesting, y'all, because Brian starts in prehistory, and here some slides about India, and about the making bhang in India and the tradition that is, chillums, and the fact that this was probably this first way that humans learned to consume, or at least to smoke cannabis, if not the Scythians doing it in the sweat lodge kind of area. And then certainly a lot of time spent on social justice and the impact that this had, especially for brown and black people. You haven't heard from anybody in the Anslinger family yet, have you?
No, not yet. Not yet. What a villain this guy is, you know, like, when you think about it. So like, when I was I think kind of before I started doing research, I was like, well, you know, I'm sure, I don't know, didn't know exactly why they made it illegal. I thought maybe like they really believed that it was harming people. Like, in my mind, I was, you know, before I found out, really understood, I was like, oh, they really believed at the time that it was harming people, and that's why they made it illegal. And now they're using it, you know, to attack you, to oppress black and brown people. But the original intent of the law was to protect people from harm. And then when I did my research, I was like, no, the whole point from the beginning was not to protect anyone from harm, but to oppress the lower classes and to oppress black and brown people. And I was like, I mean, to me, like that it makes it just so much more, because now it's like the law doesn't just need to be changed where they're not arresting people, and like, you know, you can maybe start a business, perhaps, or you grow your own, maybe. There has been a 83-year, like, war and oppression of the people and theft of business. And it needs to be paid back. And whenever we look at like new laws, so like I live in Pennsylvania, and we have a medical program here that is really inequitable. Like, it's not a good program. It's very corporate run. The prices are sky high, and like, when I see laws like that, it makes me realize that people don't know the real story, because you wouldn't make a law that is economically oppressive still in legalization. Like, you got to start from zero, my friend. You can't start with this corporate scheme and only these people. You got to start from nothing. It is a plant that the law doesn't need to be changed. Like, it doesn't need to be molded into exactly what's going to benefit everybody. It needs to be repealed immediately because it is bullshit from the beginning. So like, that's the stance that I have when I think about legalization now. I think like sometimes people in the Pennsylvania legalization movement don't really like me because I'm like, won't stand for any of the half measure shit, because I'm just like, no, this is a wrong that needs to be righted first before anybody makes any money. And so that's just like my thoughts on it after making this book, because once you know the history, it's like you can't get away from it.
Well, and that's why I think your book is so important. Could you talk to us a little bit, because we know this was nasty business. This was a multi-billion-dollar propaganda campaign, decades paid by our taxpayer dollars, and also our taxpayer dollars taking people's freedom away and keeping them in jail, breaking up families. Could you talk to us a little bit about the Gore files? Because I don't think people understand just how nasty this business was.
So the Gore files, this is like, so the whole, really the responsibility for this law really does fall very much on the head of this one guy, Ainslinger. And the thing is that he convinced all these people in the United States that this was a good idea. It was a very bad idea, and then we exported it to the rest of the rest of the world, right? It was because of our meddling, and we forced the rest of the world to also make this plant illegal. And so, like, it all comes down to this guy Ainslinger, and all Ainslinger really wanted was career. He was a careerist. He just wanted to have a successful career. It was nothing else. I mean, he was a racist dude and used racism to this end, but ultimately his goal was just to like do well in his career and like be a big shot. And the profound effect that it had on the world is crazy. So what he did, and he did this himself, was he would scour newspapers for any kind of crime involving cannabis or not involving cannabis, or like anything that had any sniff of where it might be cannabis. One of the most famous ones that I illustrate in the book is from it's from Ybor City, Florida, and what happened was this guy was like schizophrenic, and he like was sleeping, and he woke up and kind of was like in a dream state. He like killed his mother and his father, and I think it's also his sister. And because he was like asleep, and it was like a salacious story, and then in something in his story or something, some area where he hung out or something like that, they were like, oh, that's where they get weed from. So there was just this little tiny kernel of cannabis in there. And then this guy Ainslinger himself blew it up into, this guy smoked marijuana and then he axe murdered his whole family. And it's like, it's such a tragedy. Like, I feel, it's such a horrible thing for this guy that was schizophrenic. He had this horrible experience. He lost his whole family, and then he was like a famous cannabis killer. And that was just one of many. So he would just do this all the time. This was like trying to gin up attention for cannabis and pose it as like a thing that you're gonna die. You got the family crowd and the white crowd and the suburban crowd, that type of people, middle class, like thinking that cannabis is gonna kill people, are gonna kill you. Not that it was just gonna kill, not to mention kill the users. You know what I mean? They really wanted people to believe that it was going to cause crime against them just by it being a legal thing.
And of course, he had cooperation from Randolph Hearst, who ran a series of newspapers, and then later cooperation from Hollywood even. There's a great book about how weed was used in Hollywood for the same sensationalized kind of thing, well beyond Reefer Madness or what was originally called Tell Your Children. So the fix was on early. And we know when you have news sources who are willing to spread tripe, people will believe it, because people will believe smiling faces sometimes. And so it's a great shame, but this was this is so much information to then whittle down, and then do this beautiful artistic representation. But it really is easy to follow. Was it particularly challenging for you with this subject to do that, to bring it down to bite size?
Honestly, like sometimes I'm like, how do I keep it even interesting? Because it's so like, I don't want it to be a textbook is my main thing. So that can like be problematic sometimes, where you're like, it's just information, blah, 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 blah. So that's honestly like when you do the gore files, it's so outlandish, the story. It kind of like keeps the reader entertained a little bit. But I was just, focusing. People ask me that all the time, like, how do you distill it down? And I don't really have an answer. I kind of think of myself as like a machine, or like a funnel or something like that, where it's like you just read and read and read and read and look up stuff, watch videos, all these different things, and then into a comic. And then so it's just kind of like the things that stood out to me as pivotal moments in the history. The part of the research. So I don't know. So I have some things to say, but I think you have some questions maybe that I can get into later.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just so like when I started the book, I wanted to scope as far back in history as I could, but it was only really documented, like the current history documentation of it only goes back so far. It's like late 1800s, and then there's kind of like rumors of other stuff so it doesn't go back to like prehistory. But cannabis appears in Hindu mythology that does go back to the beginning of time. So I open the book at the beginning of time. It's the churning of the milk ocean, which is Hindu mythology, where they're, all of the building blocks of life are coming out of the ocean, and some kind of poison comes out, and the god Shiva drinks it, and he turns blue. That's why he's blue. And so that happens, but cannabis comes out of there, and so it was just like I wanted to point out that like cannabis is as sacred and important to Hindu mythology as like wine is to Catholic or Christian mythology, because we wouldn't. That's like there's no way to like take it all the way back, because it's just there's no. The history in American or Eastern culture or Western culture is like not really there. So then there's that, and but like the thing that was the most inspiring to me making the book was the legalization efforts as they started to happen in the 90s, and how it was like grown out of the AIDS epidemic and the AIDS gay movement and AIDS movements kind of like combined into like two separate movements that kind of like became one. And this just kind of was part of it also, because these people, it's funny because like Reagan was like this big, he hated cannabis, and he wanted to make sure it was, or I don't know if he even cared about cannabis one way or the other, but he had a vested interest in it staying illegal and people fearing it. And he was the just say no and all these different things, but it was his lack of response and lack of government response to the AIDS epidemic that eventually got the wheels moving, and now weed is legal. So it was his own fault for fucking over the entire gay community and of the American people with an epidemic, and he was ignoring it and not putting resources towards it. I don't know if you could draw a similar conclusion what's going on today. Maybe, whatever, I'll leave it to you guys. But it was just great to me that it was his own fault. Because of that, that movement arose, and a few years later, like 1996 was the first compassionate care laws, in the United States, and it wasn't that long after Reagan was gone.
For sure, and if anybody's seen Dallas Buyers Club, you get a snippet of that worldview and what was going on, and patients who had everything on the line, they felt like they had nothing to lose at that point, and they needed to take the risk for other people.
It even, like, the first cannabis collectives where you could go get cannabis was just like a buyer's club. I mean, it was just people pooling their resources for patients that needed it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, not a recreational use, really. I mean, it was like for people, because if you needed it, if you were living in freaking San Francisco at the time and you wanted to just get high and you were in the scene, you could just get fucking weed. I mean, it's fucking, let's be straight here. This is for people, for patients that like aren't in that world. This was a way for them to open up the doors to them and allow them to have safe access to it, which is what our dispensaries are supposed to be like here.
And it's fascinating, human efforts like with the spraying of paraquat on outside grow California brought the weed inside, and then you had this genetic explosion and innovation in indoor growing, and what they say, they thought they could bury me, and they didn't know I was a weed, or they didn't realize I was a seed. I want to make sure to open the floor to our students. We got a lot of smart people on the call, and I'm sure some folks that have some questions for you.
Sure.
Who wants to step up first? I know you're an inquisitive bunch.
I just have a statement to make. As Brian was talking, it made me think of really where we are today, and that was that fear mode when it came to Reagan. And then there's some discoveries some education that goes into it, and we have discoveries, and then we get into the recovery of it.
Yeah.
I have a question. How did you get into writing books? My grandmother and my grandfather are both authors. Just small authors, the few books here and there. Cartoon. My papa, he does mostly cartoon style stuff. Yeah. His last book was a Christmas cartoon book for children. Anyways, I just wanted to know how you got into that. Or take art classes, or did you do the illustrations?
Yeah. So like, I was like this. I used to draw like when I was a kid, and I like quit drawing when I was a teenage. When I was like hit puberty, I was like, I don't want to draw anymore because drawing is for children.
I feel you. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I wanted to be like fucking Mr. Tough Guy or whatever.
Yeah.
So I would like not avoid art classes, all this stuff. Then I went to college. I finished. I was like 25, and I was like, you know what? I actually like drawing. I didn't, at the time, I was like, I'm not actually good enough. I didn't think I was good enough to like take it seriously, so I might as well quit. But I was like, I like doing it. Like, who cares? Who cares if it doesn't look good or whatever? Who gives a shit? Like, it's fun for me to do. So I had to like get through that hump in my head. And so when I did that, I just started drawing again and making comics because, I started reading a lot of comics at that time. And I found comics like for adults because I was like, 25. I started reading like X-Men and stuff, but I was like, I don't really give a shit. I loved this when I was 12 and 13, my little kid, but I couldn't really get into it. But I ended up finding like comics for adults, like, Daniel Close and like James Kachalka did this comic called
Yeah.
American Elf, which was like, it was just a daily diary about his daily life. And it was, and like, that like blew my mind because like, I didn't know you could just make a comic about like regular stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of started like that. Like my first comics were just like about my own life. They're not very good. My life was not interesting or anything. It was just, it's stupid, but it got me into it. You know what I mean? And so I got really into nonfiction because like I really love documentary film, and so I kind of like apply that. I kind of think of my books as like like documentary movies.
Right on. Cool. Yeah,
No,
I'm really interested in that and documentary and history and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, honestly, if you have any inkling to do it, like there's nothing. I'll tell you right now, like there's nothing that is stopping you from doing it. Like there's nothing that like a pro does or whatever. It's just practice. It's just sitting down and doing it. You're gonna write shit that sucks, whatever. Or you won't be happy with it, or maybe you will be happy with it, or whatever. It's just about like enjoying what you do every day. And so like that was for comics. That was for me. Like I only wanted to make comics. I love sitting down and drawing and like whatever. And it became a career later.
That's so awesome.
It was
God.
no.
I got really lucky. The Andre the Giant was really ended up being success. My first book was a success, and it helped me out a lot.
I'm gonna look into getting that book, but that's awesome. I want to be happy with what I do with my life too.
I think honestly,
So
I think that the most important thing, any job, anything you're doing, probably I'm sure this is why you're here, why you wanted to get into cannabis, is just enjoy the actions that you're doing
yeah,
every day. If whatever that is, like you'll be happy.
yeah.
No, I want to piggyback, and I think I have a question out of this as well. But I do agree with what you say, and it's the be cliche that if you find a job or work that you do is no longer a job. That kind of that old adage. So it's a beautiful thing that you can sort of like those mail sorters that are going on in the U.S. Postal Service. You can take all those packages, or in this case, information and history, and funnel it into a nice, concise book, which we all have a chance to try to read now. I mean, I love graphic novels. I love comics. I mean, we have a whole industry, Comic-Con, this, that, the other. So you have a huge niche to educate for generations above and I guess below, essentially. And I also have a heart because my cousin, we're all drawers. So I love it when you can put a comic into a book and it just makes, and everyone loves Andre the Giant in WWE. So I have that little niche as well. So I might have to look at that book just as Garrett was saying. How does one come to get a publisher, or how do you, like you said, you have those conversations and they came back to you, and how do you go that thought stream?
So like I self-published for like a long time. For like first like 10 years of my career, I was like self-publishing, making zines. I had long arm stapler, all that stuff. But there's comic conventions, like Comic-Con, all that shit. But I would go to like indie cons, and it's very like
Independent. Okay.
close knit. Like you get to know all the other artists, and like through that, like not like it's networking, but it was like me making friends. I didn't have any friends or anything at the time. Like I was like opening a new chapter. Everybody was interesting to me because I was like, these are my people. You know what I mean? So you end up making like friends with all these different people, and I like found I like sent my books out to different publishers, and all people that I had met at these different conventions. I'd be like, hey, I'm this guy. This is my book. Well, I got rejected all kinds of times. So anyway, at one point I found this publisher that I sent them something, and they were interested in it and looked at it a little bit and had a little bit of back and forth, but didn't publish it. And then I had this idea for this Andre the Giant book and sent it to them again. I became friendly with the people there, like this woman that ended up being my editor. And when I had the Andre the Giant book, they were like, "This might work. whatever, we like you, so you know what I mean. It's just kind of like being persistent and like keep
Keep
trying.
knocking on the door. Keep knocking on the
Yeah, you
door.
gotta,
Yeah,
like, not quit, not get discouraged, and you know,
that's
it's
awesome.
also like about talking to other people that are doing things that you want to be doing.
Similar
And, like,
things.
yeah, I mean, I hate to use the term networking because it's so fucking stupid. But if you're really interested in it, you're just making friends with like-minded people, and you know, learning
You're
about
making connections.
yeah, and learning about your craft. Like you teach each other about what you're doing because, like, especially in comics and in cannabis too, it's like it's not like an extremely well-established point of study where you could be like, oh, this is exactly how you do it. Now there's much more resources than there was like when I got started, but it's very much like word of mouth, learning from this, blah blah blah. You get these kind of pens, get this paper works better. I ran into this stupid little problem that no one understands but a cartoonist, and they're like, oh, I did that. I cut my ruler in half. You know, like whatever, like some little tricks of the trade like that. And I think like I started getting a tiny bit into cannabis growing this summer. It's terrible. I'm awful at it, but I'm trying. But like, I think it's similar to that because it's like you can read every book in the world how to do it, but you got to like sit down and like do it and fuck up a million times. And
Yeah, you got to get in the pool to swim. You
yeah,
can't learn to
exactly.
swim outside of a pool.
You
So
can
yeah,
watch tennis all day long, but unless you're out there swinging the racket, you're not going to know how to do it. So it's
Yeah,
the same
put the
thing
hours
with
in.
comics, man. It's the same thing with writing, anything. You got to just like do it. No one is just like born amazing at shit. Like
No.
And speaking of getting in the pool or being at the table, you really did your homework for this, Brian. You've got a great resource or reference section at the back of the novel. Was there any resource that did you remember being particularly excited about or jazzed about?
so, like if you want a really good straight up like history of the like Reefer Madness era, there's a book called Reefer Madness by Ratso Sloman. That's like good. That's like a good like basic text of like the whole situation, historical look at it. Also, the book Grassroots by Emily Duffton, really good. She's a really good writer, and she gets more into like the broader history of things. I like wrote those down because I wanted to make sure I like remembered like what to do. Also, like I think it's in the bibliography, and I definitely used it in research about like what the plant is and stuff like that. And that's I have it here it is. This book, The Cannabis Encyclopedia by Jorge Cervantes, is a really good book. Not just listen. It's very good for growing. It gives you everything. But if you want to just know, like, what is all this? What you're looking at weed, and you're like, what even am I looking at? It's a good textbook, and like has very good. It's great illustration of every bit of the life cycle of cannabis.
And Jorge's old school OG. You might know him from High Times when he used to wear his bandana and his dark shades and do all his growing stuff. So yeah, I recommend that one as well. Could I ask Jorge Cervantes?
Yeah.
Was there a particular part of the book that you got that was just fun and easy for you? Was there a section that you're just like, I really like this part of it?
Well, I really liked drawing the Hindu mythology. That was fun for me. I did a lot of books years ago about different like religions and mythology. So it was like interesting to me to like figure. I didn't really know anything about it that much anyway. Like I have like a bare knowledge, but not that much. So that was interesting to me to do that. A lot of the book, though, to be honest, like was difficult to derive like joy from because it's a tragic story like all the way through. But definitely like when it got towards the end, like I was not sure where to end the book because I feel like the war on cannabis is like still happening and stuff. So I kind of ended it right at when the first medical laws came in, where there was like just a crack in the ceiling, and so those parts were were interesting to me. I really I'm blanking on his name at the moment. There's a really great activist at the end who was heavily responsible for that first law in '96.
Dennis Perone?
Say again?
Perone?
Yeah, Dennis. He was an inspiring guy. I watched a lot of videos with him, and his story is really compelling. You know, he had his partner had AIDS and had died, and he was arrested with like 4 ounces of weed on him, and they were like trying to say he was selling, dealing, and he's like, listen, I've sold tons of weed in my life, but I wasn't selling any weed that night. I was bringing 4 ounces of weed home to my partner because it was the only thing that made him feel all right while he was dying. And that's how he became an activist. And he made the shit happen at great personal peril, if you can imagine, at the time, because people were not ready for it. He forced it through, and they just were doing it. And it was inspiring to me, his whole thing.
It is, and it's a sad but great story of like human triumph, and so many people, like we talk about people with family members in jail, or people who've had family killed by police and over nonviolent offenses. It is tragic and continues to be. Like you said, the war is not over. So those of us who are benefiting or just benefiting from the freedom that we have, I think we can't ever stop to forget about those people who are still suffering. I think we got a responsibility, and I think what you've done is really you're taking your place as a warrior in this culture, and we appreciate you for completing this book.
I feel a strong responsibility to always be loud and because it's like I found when I made the book, I was like, I'm gonna go full force into activism at this point because I want to, and I don't care. And I had developed like a little bit of a following, and I was like, I can make whatever my little comics little following that I have, I can educate them and hopefully spread and be an ambassador of some kind. And I made a point to always be open about usage and how the injustices in the PA medical market and who's responsible and all that stuff. Because it's bullshit, and it was always bullshit from the beginning. Like it was never about looking out for the best interests of anybody.
So Brian, have you paid a price in any way that when you look back over all of your experiences, has there been a price to pay that kind of lingers with you?
In what way?
Oh, for instance, cannabis is really new to our tribe, our Native American tribe. And some of the elders are so much against it that those that are for that they can think of nothing else except your association with it. And I feel like I've paid a little bit of a social price. Not that I care, but
sure. I think that I've been lucky, I didn't have parents. My parents are totally like pro cannabis. Like they were never, I did get arrested and they were mad at me and stuff and punished me. But they never shunned me or were against the lifestyle of any kind. So I was lucky in that way. I don't think I faced any pushback from publishers, but maybe. I mean, it's possible. I definitely have people that have blocked me on Twitter for talking too much about legalization and stuff like that. But I've been lucky, I think, that I haven't faced as much pushback for being open about it. And I think that's why I encourage people who feel, if you feel confident enough to say it, I wouldn't want to push somebody that didn't feel, that for whatever reason they want to, that's fine. But I encourage people to, there's people out there that are just like posting a photo of themselves drinking wine. I'm having a good time. Woo! Party time. And you smoke weed in a hidden, behind the house or in the garage or something. Like, be open about it. Like, let people see it and break down the stereotype about it, because, and you can actually, if you are like that, you can make a lot of friends that you didn't think that you would make a friend. Because, for instance, like, we had this one neighbor, right? She was very nice and everything, but we were always like, she's probably, maybe a little square, Anyway, so one time my wife gets into talking to her, and we find out that she's like, oh yeah, I love edibles, like telling us all about it. And we had this, like, found you have a bond now with this person. And so you gotta, like, get over the stigma yourself, because we can all be friends. We don't have to do it. We don't have to be, you don't have to feel alone or feel that you're doing something bad. And I know it's hard to broach those subjects, but it's mostly been a positive experience, is what I'm saying. Is that I've made more friends. I've become friends with people I probably never would have become friends with, to be honest. But it's this one thing that we have in common. But I think it's overall been a positive thing.
Thank you, Lana. Anybody else? Because I'm gonna continue with my questions if y'all don't. I want to make sure I give some space though.
I like what Brian says about, you have to take the risk, and in some way, you also, in doing that, you have to be willing to consider the consequences. And I say this just because, like I said, I'm a PA, and I granted that we live in an age that we're so digitally connected. But we probably are more connected through the internet and social media than we are with actually making relationships, and even now not being able to really get together and communicate and politic and conversate like we would in 6 months ago. But like, when I say the consequences, just because I'm, like I said, I'm trying to find, as much as I believe that I'm a smart prescriber when it comes to prescribing narcotics, and we can all tie that philosophical and physiological conversations of addiction, impacts, this, that, and the other. But for me to try to find a niche where I can sit there and say, I want to be more involved, and whether I'm looking at doing authorizations or treating patients, or even offering those to surgical patients, or I'm now looking into neurosurgery. Actually, to be honest, I'm thinking of switching up some things as well. But even in terms of, I'm sure I'm going to go into the realm of treating migraines. And if here we are dosing meds, making big pharma wealthy and so forth. But if I do say, you know what, I'm going to take a stance, and I'm going to smoke a joint, to post a picture of me smoking a joint on the internet. Monday morning, I'm let go. Monday morning, I'm losing my license. And that's, you have to be willing to really consider those consequences.
I'm always like, it's a personal decision. I would never be like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. But if you are, I feel I am in a position where I'm not gonna get fired. My publisher doesn't care. It's good for the book to talk about it and stuff like that.
It's great to talk about this stuff, and I'm trying to figure out how to have it more.
So it's not a problem for me. But there's other people out there that are like me, where it's really not a consequence for them in any way, but they're still very quiet about it. And I just want to but of course, absolutely, you got to put your livelihood and your best interest in mind for absolutely first. And if you can't, fine. If you can't be super public about it, fine. But you can still talk to your family. You can hopefully talk to your, with your friends and other. Maybe I have a 3-year-old son, like I like to be open with other parents about it and be like, let them know that it's not, it's cool and it's I'm still a good father and all this stuff. And, because I think that's important too.
No, yeah, we talk about lighting small fires a lot of times, and I know we've had that conversation before that, part of the normalization is just maybe talking to somebody who you wouldn't normally talk to about this, whether it's a grandparent or somebody else who you don't think is going to be a good receiving audience, but just those small fires. Hey, did you know that the reason there's a law about this was really not based in science? And the American Medical Association, the chief doctor for medical association, stood up against this, changing the law to Congress, and they looked past him. And people don't realize that. So once again, I'm shamelessly plugging this book, Brian, and because it's a great Christmas thing, it's a great leave behind. It's unlike a textbook, you can read a chapter at a time and get something to absorb and think about and come back to. Brian, I keep calling you Brian. You go by Box Brown as your author name, so I don't want to confuse anybody. And I've got
it's confusing because now I go by Brian Box Brown.
Okay.
So it's fine.
I just want to make sure.
I felt like at some point I was like, I'm 40 years old. I could use my real name. Like I got this Box nickname when I was in college. Like I don't even, you know what I mean? I don't even care anymore. So I'm ready to be myself now.
No, let me ask you though. Do you have a preference when people buy this book? I know sometimes. Would you just recommend we go to a local bookstore for that? I know we try to.
Usually that's what I say. Like just go to your local bookstore. There's a bunch of comic shops. If you guys are in Seattle area, there's a bunch of really great shops in the Seattle area. There's Fangraphix bookstore and I want to say Vortex Comics, but there's a bunch of good places there. If you want to order copies like online, there's 3 places I recommend. One is called Brave New Worlds, Philadelphia. One is called Partners and Son, and that's also in Philadelphia. And the other one is called Solid State Books, and that's in Washington, D.C. Solid State Books has some signed copies. If you want a signed copy, they have some.
Cool. Thank you very much. Hey, this has been a thrill for us. I appreciate, because I know not everybody knows or got this on the front side. You had some major house water issues and piping problems, so you weren't even sure that you were going to be able to do this without construction noise in the back end. And so glad that's fixed for you. And emergencies happen, so thanks for sticking with us through yours. I do want to let you all know, as we talk about normalization and exposure and growing your cannabis family, right here, and this is for everybody. Brian, you're welcome to join us. Anybody outside of Seattle, welcome to join us. This the link I just put in chat for the Cannabis Alliance events. I am with the Cannabis Alliance, but you might not realize every Tuesday from 4 to 5 we have a open happy hour, and so there's an opportunity to come in, chat. It's a free consumption zone, and we started it during COVID, or they started it during COVID, to just keep our bond there. And then and then you'll have a link in there. Once a month, we also have our Cannabis Alliance meetings, which are also virtual now and also open temporarily to the public. So if you'd like to join us, we welcome you to join us for that.